Good afternoon. Welcome to your show. My name is Bahman Yazdanfar and this is Voters Echo for the Tuesday, 23rd of the June 2015. Before we start with our guest, I want to mention a couple of things for our viewer as a disclaimer or disclosure. This show is run by me. I am not being paid by anybody, any organization, any political party, any union whatsoever. They allocate my time and my effort by myself. The time of the show is contributed by Dr. James Sears, which I appreciate him to give me that opportunity to continue my educational program. The topic of today's show is freedom of speech, something that probably, especially these days, become more relevant than anything else among Canadians, Ontarians, Torontonians, especially when we have governments that are elected with less than 20% of the eligible voters, either provincially or federally. Without further ado, let's start to introduce our guest. I let Lawrence to introduce himself. Welcome, Lawrence, to the show.
Hi, Bowman.
Can you tell to our audience a little bit about yourself?
I'm Lawrence McCurry. I'm a writer, a filmmaker, a media critic, and an all-around troublemaker.
Good for you. That is enough. How long you are in this gig?
How long am I in this game? As long as I can remember, I've been causing trouble, Bowman. How long have I been writing and making films? A few years.
Okay. As you know, when I ask you to come here, because you are one of those few individuals that on your own trying to gather news and analyze it outside of the mainstream media.
The alternative media.
Alternative media is a good word for that. Before I get to the concept of the freedom of speech, can you just tell our audience what are the challenges when you as an individual try to convey a message that is important and is crucial to the public?
Well, I mean, the main challenge is you don't have the same audience that you get with corporate media. You know, corporate media and alternative media are as different as night and day. I really do believe that alternative media are the people that are working and putting stuff out on the internet are the only people that are doing real journalism anymore. 10, 15 years ago, I had a friend of mine who's passed away now, but he produced articles. He produced shows for the CBC, the Fifth Estate. And he told me that our media in Canada is more controlled now than it was in the Soviet Union during the days of the old Soviet or in China.
And that was 15 years ago.
And that was 15 years ago. And I don't think a lot of people realize that our media here in North America, you know, not only Canada and the United States, but most of Europe for that matter as well, is very controlled. You know, to say the media lies, it's not always outright lies, but it's lies of omission and it's lies of spin. You know, there are things that go on in the world that the media either underreport or don't report on at all. For example, last week there was huge austerity riots in England and France, and that doesn't get reported on Canadian media at all.
And when you mentioned that it is controlled, who is the controller? Is it the state? Is it government?
Well, that's another thing about corporate media. You know, at one time in this country, going back to Confederation, we had media ownership laws in this country. You know, it used to be just newspapers, but as radio and television came into its own, you know, these laws were expanded to include that. And the idea behind these media ownership laws were so that the press was in as many hands as possible to give you the widest opinions The more newspapers there were that were owned by more people, the more positions you would get. Under the Mulroney administration, those media ownership laws were thrown right out the window. So what happened?
It was at the time of the Conrad Black and.
Well, exactly. It's when Conrad Black was buying up all the newspapers in the country. So basically, we're in a situation today where all of the media right across. At one time, the law was that you couldn't own more than one newspaper, radio, or television station in the same market, and the CRTC has changed these laws as they've gone along, like in 2000 and 2003, to suit whichever corporate conglomerate was making a takeover. Now, all of the media right across the country, the newspapers, the radio stations, the television stations, are in the control of like 3 or 4 people. So everything is owned by, Bell Media and Quebec Corp, and the same people that give us the politicians that now we're getting into whether we're living in a democracy or not.
Well, that is very interesting because my very first guest in this new series of show about 4 weeks ago was Greg Vazena, the leader of the None of the Above party, and he was mentioning about the role of CRTC or lack thereof in this case, not regulating the amount of the airtime given to the politicians evenly to the candidates at the time of the election. So what you're saying that it impacts all sort of the
not only is it not regulated, but politics is a closed shop in Canada, isn't it? When you see leadership debates, for example, very often these leadership debates are sponsored by a media outlet, the CBC or one of the newspapers, and they only invite the major parties.
Yes.
So, when you see this leadership debate on television, you're seeing the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP. Last couple of years, they've allowed the Green Party to participate, which isn't really even a Canadian party. The Green Party is sponsored by the UN. So, it gives the voter the impression that your choice is only between the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDPs, and the Greens. Truth of the matter is that there's always a whole slate of candidates that are independent. There are all kinds of what they refer to as fringe political parties in Canada, and they literally get no coverage in the media at all. Not in newspapers, not in television, not in radio. I mean, they even yanked, the CRTC yanked the license of the Ryerson University station a couple of years back.
Why, did they have a station?
There you go. Yeah, they did. Most of the universities in this country did have radio stations at one time. And the CRTC has yanked the license on most of those broadcasters.
So really, just a dozen people or a couple dozen people really control what is being fed to the public.
I'd say like less than half a dozen control what the public actually sees. And when they do report on something, it's always reported in such a way that they control the narrative of the story. A lot of people say the media lies. Well, the media doesn't have to tell, big whopping lies to control the population. Most of the way that the media lies to you is through spin and lies of omissions. They either don't report a story or underreport a story, or they put a spin on a story so that it comes out as something totally different. I'll give you an example. During the G20, there was like...
Actually, we are in the 5th anniversary this month.
I was there.
Yeah?
I was there. During the G20, there was like 1,000 people arrested. Okay, now most of these people were just people on the street. They were either out protesting. Some of them were people that were going to the movies or coming from a restaurant that got caught up in a kettling or a sweep.
The one
You
on
know,
the
they- yeah, they
Espadina
they went
Queen,
out to see what was going on, and they got arrested, right? Now, the thing is that most of these people committed no crimes. So when they were going to court, the media reported that these people were going to court, but what did they show? You know, they're telling you, today 300 people went to court on G20 related charges, but they're showing you pictures of burning police cars and the black bloc breaking windows. Like these...
Not 300 people
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
going
Like these
there.
people that were going to court on G20 related charges were responsible for those crimes. Basically, that's the same as you know, showing you a picture of a rogue elephant trampling a crowd while telling you a story about how the circus is coming to town. That's exactly what they did in this case of the G20, and I've seen it on many other instances as well. You know, so these are lies of spin. You know, they'll tell you about you know, 300 people who went to court on G20 related charges. Most of those people had their cases thrown out because they'd committed no crime, and the charges they were committed with are the charges that they were accused of were totally bogus. But you know, while they're telling you this story about these people going to court, they're not telling you the outcomes
The
of these
same
trials.
image
And,
of
and,
the
and
car.
they're showing you images of burning police cars and breaking windows. And it's a lie of spin.
You remind me of something about 10 years ago or so, or even more than that. There was a buzz that there is a station in Russia called Naked News, and the woman comes and tell you very serious stories, and while she's giving you the stories, taking her clothes off.
I used to watch that. I thought it was a great show.
So what I'm saying is, it is the same thing, because your visual is, in fact, it makes them more confusion for the audience, isn't it? That you show something else and talk about something else.
Well, what it does is it gives you the wrong impression on the story they're telling. You know,
so it's not a lie, but it's like a distorting the
exactly. It's not an outright lie, but it's a lie of spin.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it's like telling you, hey, the circus is coming to town next week, but they're showing you pictures of a rampaging elephant.
Yeah.
You know, so the impression you come away from that with is oh, there's rampaging elephants coming to town.
What is we have a number of the small local papers, not the ones that are associated with organizations like Metroland, or I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the individual papers, which I have a sample of.
There's not a lot of those left anymore, actually. I noticed. I noticed you've got in front of you the Word News.
Yes, I'm going to talk about that later. But first, I want to know, those small stations, local, either radio or TV or alternative media like online, the ones that we have, they don't have a chance to grow, do they? Because I don't have the budget.
Well, if you want to talk about alternative media, no, alternative media for the most part is financed through donation by the people who watch it. I very seldom get paid for anything I write.
You're better than me. I never get paid.
Yeah, I've never monetized my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So even though I had a film that went viral, you know, a few months back, I didn't make cent one off of it. But there's outfits like Press for Truth, you know, that use a funding model of support from their viewership. And it works for you know, people like Dan to do it that way, but he's certainly underfunded in what he does. You know, it's still basically a one-man operation running around with his camera trying to get stories. So it's never going to be able to reach as large an audience as the corporate news. Now, he did an interesting story a couple of weeks ago. He was covering the Bilderberg conference in Austria.
It was in Austria or England?
Right. Well, before that, he did the G7 conference in Germany.
Okay.
Now, what was interesting about this is he actually got press credentials they made some mistake. They thought he was with the CBC, and they actually gave him press credentials. So he got into the area where all of the so-called professional journalists are covering
the real journalists.
What they call the real journalists.
Yes.
And basically what he said was that these guys aren't doing real journalism. They go in there, they get all this free food and free booze, and basically they're handed a package.
Like a press release.
Like a press release. They're handed statements, they're handed, canned film. They don't get close enough to the leaders to shoot their own film. They don't get to go in there and ask questions. Anything you've seen on the national news about the G7 conference in Germany last month was basically the package that the leaders put out that they wanted people to know about. There was no real reporting. and these so-called journalists are not really journalists at all.
And what's happened to Dan? Did he manage to go all the way or not?
He got in there. Right?
Okay, that's good.
He got in there, and he got the free food and the free booze, and hey, more power to him, right? But did he use the package? Did he use the canned film that they handed him? What's the point?
What is the point?
Because what you end up with is the same newscast right across the country, no matter who the journalist is. There's nothing original there because they're only working from a script that's handed to them by the government.
Well, you mentioned about the video that some time ago, a few months ago, you put it on YouTube and went viral. That was a good example of the mainstream media not reporting the real news.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. I filmed a piece at the federal courthouse in Toronto. Prominent constitutional lawyer, Rocco Galati. Rocco is the same lawyer that took the government to court, took the Harper government to court on the Nadon case.
Yeah, the judge.
About appointing judges in Quebec and won. So there's no question, Rocco Galati is probably the most prominent constitutional lawyer in the country. And he is right now in the midst of the biggest case of his career, which is the Comer versus the Bank of Canada. Comer, which is an independent economic think tank, one of the ones that's not sponsored by the bankers, is taking the government to court over the Liberal government in '74 turned our financial matters in Canada over to the private bankers. It used to be that the Bank of Canada, which is owned by the people of Canada, and the shares are held in trust by the finance minister, would make no interest or low interest loans to the government for infrastructure projects. For example, in Toronto, we talk about building more subways, and one of the things that always comes up is, where's the money going to come from?
For the last 30 years.
Well, in the past, that money came in the form of a no interest loan from the Bank of Canada, which again is owned by the people of Canada. That's how Canada financed the Second World War. That's how we built the St. Lawrence Seaway. That's how we built the Trans-Canada Highway. That's how come we've got our OHIP and our Medicare system in Canada. It was done through no interest loans through the Bank of Canada. Excuse me. In 1974, the Liberal government of Pierre Trudeau stopped using the Bank of Canada and decided that they were going to, rather than borrow money off the Bank of Canada interest-free, they were going to borrow it off of private bankers. Mm-hmm. Well, because of that, we now have this huge deficit in Canada that runs into trillions of dollars. I mean, we pay over $1.7 million every single day in interest alone on the national debt.
To the private banks.
To the private bankers. And that's money that could have been borrowed interest-free from the Bank of Canada. So Rocco, on behalf of Comer, is taking the government to court over this. Now, this has huge implications for Canada's financial system and our democracy. Yet it's been totally unreported by the mainstream media.
Which is my point.
Well, when I covered the original press conference, when Rocco was saying he's going to take this case on in the first place.
When was that? 2011.
That was in October 2011.
Yeah.
And the only people that showed up for this press conference were Dan Dix from Press for Truth, Terry Wilson from the Canadian Awareness Network, some guy who writes for a magazine out in Winnipeg or something. Me and Art Smitherman are the only people that actually showed up for this press conference.
No one from the
mainstream
SAR,
corporate
National
media.
Post.
The mainstream corporate media has not covered this at all. Now, I interviewed Rocco in the lobby of the courthouse after his last big win last January.
Yeah.
And here was the most prominent constitutional lawyer in the country, got in front of my camera and made two statements. First of all, he said, I don't think that this case is being covered in the media because the government has told the media not to cover it. And I've got that on good authority. Second, he said, I don't believe we're living in a democracy. I believe that Canada is a quiet dictatorship. Now here you've got the most prominent constitutional lawyer in the country saying that Canada is not a democracy and it doesn't get covered by any of the media. None of them.
But they report a kitten trapped in top of the tree.
Well, sure, yeah. You see kittens trapped in trees and, all kinds of, somebody on TV became a transvestite or something.
Yeah,
that's all over the place, right?
You see...
I'd say the Kardashians, but I don't even really know who the Kardashians are. But I've heard them reported on.
Actually, even on the visual media like TVs and main station on TV, Canadian like CBC and so on. I am not watching TV for years, but when I was watching it a few years back, I noticed that in the span of 4 hours of the prime time, let's say from 6-7 o'clock in the afternoon till 10 or 11 o'clock, most of the time they are talking about who did what in Hollywood.
Fluff stories.
Yeah, and in Hollywood, not anywhere in Canada. I mean, it was like they are a subsidiary of the American Broadcasting Corporation.
Well, that's what's passing for news these days, is entertainment stories.
So that is news.
The only real news that people are getting is, it's funny. I heard somebody actually said to me, I don't watch the news. I said, well, where do you get your news from? Oh, I watch Jon Stewart. They get their news off a comedian.
Actually, Jon Stewart, quite honestly, again...
Jon Stewart is a comedian. He's a comedian, which is great, it's...
No, what I'm trying to say is, if you compared what it said in Jon Stewart's show, and compare it with the NBC
nightly news,
it's more accurate.
Yeah, exactly. You're getting more information off the comedian than you are off the nightly news.
Let me just go back to what we discussed. I am going to tell you what this thing is interested me. I am familiar with Your War News. I know the publisher, Leroy Saint Germain. He's supposed to be here, as I said earlier. He couldn't make it because of the conflict.
He must have heard I was coming.
Oh, probably. I didn't know you are that scary, but nevertheless. I am going to tell you what I saw, because I live on War 30, which is adjacent to the 31, and 32 as well. I just want to say, I'm familiar with this newspaper for last maybe 4 or 5 years.
I grew up in that neighborhood.
Okay. And usually they run news about our councillors, our politicians. Always they're edgy. Always they talk about they do some research and put it as is. A spade is a spade. It is.
Big respect for Leroy.
Yeah. Now, up until January and February, which I have the papers here. I don't know if it can zoom in or not. Uh, Business was as usual. I didn't see much. And last year, the person who donated his time with that channel to me, Dr. James Sears, who was running as a consular for a consular position on Ward 32 in 2014, he has started to put some of his ad in that. And apparently he started in...
I believe he's the editor of the paper.
Recently.
Leroy St. Germain is the publisher. And
I am getting to that. I just want to follow the chronological. Up until February, business was as usual. Nothing happened. Then on March, this paper printed, which Dr. James Sears put a wrap against of the actual paper. So it was his ad. It was the paper of the actual paper. Apparently, and it was the first time that they delivered it by Canada Post.
Right.
Now, something happened. One of the employees, the mail carrier of the Canada Post, just one, and I believe he is part-time mail carrier, he started to make a noise because of this picture of the Pierre Trudeau having a...
It's Pierre Trudeau in a Nazi uniform.
Yeah, okay, but again, it's democracy. The people have the right to put whatever they want to do. If anyone doesn't like it, go and sue the paper.
Well, wait a second. First of all, Pierre Trudeau, when he was in college, this stems from a true story, actually. When Pierre Trudeau was in college, he actually rode around Montreal on a motorcycle in a Nazi uniform. True story. So, you know, to show a picture of Pierre Trudeau dressed as a Nazi is not that big a stretch.
Yeah,
because it did actually happen.
But really, I'm not keen about the. I'm not focusing on the actual story. But the question is that mail carrier, just one mail carrier, refused to deliver the paper, which was part of his job, and made a big noise about this.
He objected to it.
Yes. And then they got behind the union. Union came. Union sent a letter to the businesses who advertised in this paper. And they made a mountain all of something that for years nobody really
paid that much attention to.
So, I have a question for you in two parts. One, does a mail carrier has the right to refuse the delivery of mail just because he or she does not like the content?
No.
Okay.
No.
Second question is, isn't that a little bit counterproductive that if you don't want to pay attention to the content of what they claim is garbage,
line your birdcage with it.
Then why do you go to the media and make a big and even helping to the publicity of the paper?
Well, you know, actually, this went even further than that.
Which
let's get the story straight. What happened here was they published a picture of Pierre Trudeau in a Nazi uniform.
On the March issue.
As I said, you know, there's a story that's been going around for years that Pierre Trudeau actually rode around Montreal on a motorcycle in a Nazi uniform when he was in college. So that's not that big a stretch. Now this Jewish mail carrier objected to it because it was a Nazi uniform. Okay? The controlled left got behind it. Now
and left, do you mean NDPers?
Well, you know, listen.
Or liberal left.
Listen, the liberal left in Toronto are more of an obedience cult than they are a political ideology, okay? There's certain leaders of the liberal left in Toronto that dictate what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I'm talking about people like Sid Ryan of the Federation of Labor. I'm talking about people like Judy Rebick and Warren Kinsella, who happens to live in that riding, were the people that were behind objecting to this. Now, when these people come out and speak against something, you know, the Borg Collective, I mean, these people actually call themselves a collective, okay? I call them the Borg Collective because, You know, it's like I said, it's not so much a political ideology as much as it is an obedience cult. You go to any of the universities in this city, York University being the worst, you can't come out in York University and say, hey, I support the conservatives, because you'll get harassed right out of the school. You know, these lefty, as Don Cherry called them when Rob Ford was inaugurated the first time, these left-wing kooks. And that's exactly what they are, is left-wing kooks. I call it an obedience cult. And not only did they object to it, you know, they called the police and said, oh, let's lay hate charges against these people. They started a campaign where they started calling all of the advertisers of the paper and harassing them, right? So really, you know, this is a small handful of people that are saying, oh, we disagree with your freedom of speech. You know, these are the first people to start screaming blue bloody murder when you try to control their freedom of speech.
So freedom of speech
but if they don't like what you got to say, right, they get downright nasty about it. I think the political left ideology, the obedience cult of the liberal left in Toronto are a dangerous group of people. Yes, I said it. The lefty kooks in Toronto are a dangerous bunch of people. I mean, they went after the advertisers of this paper and harassed them to no end, right?
Let me ask you, how so what you're saying is freedom of speech is good as long as everybody talks their tune.
Listen, I don't think we should even have hate laws in this country. To be honest with you, if you're going to have freedom of speech, everybody should have.
Which I am going to. We are going to get to that. Before that, then we expand all of that. Use this as an example.
I thought this was a 1 hour show. I could go on about this.
You are fine. You are fine. Then it came to the April, and they put again the same thing. Dear Canada Post letter. Dr. James Sears write on behalf of the new Constitution Party of Canada, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for quietly doing your duty by reliably delivering mail to all our homes. Now, one person made that, and immediately they started to keep, Canada Post started, or Union rather, not Canada Post, Union of the Mail Carrier, they started to examine the future papers before they deliver. They start to do delivery because of that hate law.
Since when does the union have the right to decide what they're going to deliver and what they're not going to deliver? Who decided that the Canada Postal Union was a censor for anybody that wants to put out a newspaper in this country? That's a very dangerous precedent to set. Are we going to take Canada Postal Union and put them in charge of who could say what in the newspaper? That's a dangerous precedent.
That is my point. If there is a freedom of speech, if the free journalism should be a necessity element in the democracy, to keep our politicians on their toe by stifling the local paper, which probably has about what, readership of 50.
Yeah, it's a word paper.
Out of the 4 million living in GTA, are they really that much scared of a small paper?
Well, absolutely. This started long before James Sears put his wrapper. That's what they call it when somebody buys the front and back page and they put it over top of the paper. Yeah. It's called a wrapper.
Yeah.
This started long before that, back when Leroy went after Sandra Busson. This paper was the only paper. Oh, you are
talking about 5 years ago.
Yeah, 5 years ago. This paper was the only paper that ever got sued by the city of Toronto, and they won. Okay?
Who won?
The paper did.
The paper one, yeah.
Right. I mean, basically, they were saying that Sandra, it had to do with a restaurant in the Beaches.
Oh, the controversy over the
Exactly.
the donations.
There was a conflict of interest there, and the paper pointed it out, and city councilor Sandra Busson didn't like it, and she used the taxpayers' money to sue the paper and lost.
And we are wondering why always we are short in the money. Always there is money for lawsuit, but there is no money.
Well,
for
how are you going to fight? You know, here's somebody that's running a small little, you know, local newspaper. This doesn't even go out citywide. This goes out in one ward in Toronto, and you know, they're fighting lawyers from City Hall. They're fighting lawyers from Canada Post, and the loony left that all get together and start calling up their advertisers and harassing them. Harassing the people that actually bought ad space in this local little paper because they ran a picture of Pierre Trudeau dressed as a Nazi.
I am just curious.
And you know, you got to keep in mind, you know, Pierre Trudeau, you know, and for the last 50 years in this country, okay, all of our prime ministers, most of the provincial ministers, key cabinet posts, all of these people have been employees of Paul Desmarais of Power Corporation. Pierre Trudeau and René Lévesque were members of the Communist Party before they started working for Paul Desmarais of Power Corporation. Paul Martin got his shipping company from Paul Desmarais of Power Corp. John Chrétien's daughter married right into the family. Brian Mulroney, upon leaving office as Prime Minister, moved right into the board of directors of Power Corporation. So, you know, what kind of a democracy do we have when Power Corporation has picked every prime minister we've had for the last 50 years?
So what is the point of spending all of this money for the election if they know who is coming to the power?
Well, I don't think that we have a democracy in Canada. And I recently wrote an article about that too. I think we've got the semblance of a democracy in Canada. I don't really believe we do have a democracy.
It's like that picture that you said. They are showing the cars are in fire, but they are talking about something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, you know, James Sears recently started his own political party.
Yeah, New Constitutional Party of Canada. I believe personally, again, this show is not about what I think, but I believe if we want to have at least look of the democracy, we have to be able to at least speak our mind. Well, minimum is minimum requirement.
They've made it very difficult to start political parties in this country. You know yourself, you've run in federal elections.
Yes.
You got to take $1,000 up front and give it to the government just to get your name on the ballot.
Yeah, there's a deposit and you have to go through a lot
and file tax returns and jump through hoops and paint your testicles purple. Before they'll give you that money back
and
again.
During the campaign, even they don't let you to participate in their debates or get any airtime from the.
Well, exactly. So I mean, you know, let's not throw around words like democracy because I don't think we have one.
Well, let's say an electoral process. Let's go to back to the freedom of speech and its impact to our daily lives. Now, my question from you is, for me, it's very difficult to understand that a big organization, especially like left wing, that we have so many of the councillors are left wing, so many of our MPPs are left wing, we have so many of our federal MPs or MPP from the left. If organization and with a cohesive, a strong cohesive organization, why they are afraid of a small paper? That for me, it's very difficult.
And it's not just the small paper, it's all alternative media. This is one of the reasons why the government is in such a quandary about controlling the internet. Again and again, they've proposed legislation to get control of the internet. Now, why do they want to control the internet? Well, because you're free to go on the internet and tell whatever story you want to. If they could control the internet, then they could control the alternative media. You know, guys like me couldn't shoot a film like Rocco Galati in the federal courthouse.
And then post it on YouTube.
And then post it on YouTube and have it go viral and write articles about how important the Comer versus Bank of Canada lawsuit is because nobody else is reporting. They don't want people to know about this, right? The thing about the alternative media is the alternative media is giving you news that the powers that be don't want you to know about. In this particular case, they're tongue-in-cheek spoofing left-wing politicians, and guys like Warren Kinsella don't like that.
Actually, there is a article in the last issue, June issue, about the Warren Kinsella, and I quite honestly, I sent an email. I know it was short notice though. I sent a message through his website, and I
invited
him to be here today.
What a shame! I would love to discuss freedom of speech with Warren Kinsella.
Freedom of speech. But be fair, maybe he didn't check his email or something like that.
To be fair, guys like Warren Kinsella can't control the message on a show like this.
Well, invitation is open. If he wants to come, just send me an email.
He's afraid.
Okay, but having said that, still I don't understand. If they want to control, shouldn't they put their energy to control something more more threatening to their establishment than a local paper?
I think a local paper is threatening to their establishment. The use of political correctness is a control method. Okay, if you got a little local paper like this that say we don't care about political correctness, then that's the child saying the emperor has no clothes, right? When you disagree with the controlled left, when you disagree with the obedience cult of the left, basically. They need to shut you down. They'll call you a Nazi, they'll call you a bigot, they'll call you a misogynist, and that's all they've got in their toolbox.
Last year, I had a show with a colleague of mine called Independent Nation, and that show was specifically designed prior to the municipal election of 2014. I sent numerous invitations to all councillors, and I think except one who accepted graciously my invitation, even though I sent 3 or 4 in some cases invitations, none of them wanted to participate or respond to. Some of them even they don't bother to respond.
And why do you think that was? And then I'll tell you why I think it was.
I can't really speculate what it was, but what I'm asking you that probably you can shed light on that. If these people are so meticulous, let me use that word, meticulous, to be offended with a local paper's article, shouldn't they, with the open arms, accept this kind of invitation and explain where they stand for?
They can't control the message. The reason that these left-wing councillors and politicians would never do a show like yours or ignore the alternative media is because they can't control the message, right? When they go to the CBC, they know that the person that's interviewing them is controlled. That controlled interview is not going to go in places that they don't want to go. That controlled interview is not going to ask them hard questions that they're not prepared to answer. And one of the reasons they won't come on this show is because they know that you're going to ask whatever questions that you want to. You're not being controlled by a publisher or an editor or a boss who's going to fire you if you don't toe the company line.
So even though they are screaming about the total freedom, transparency, as they do on the media and their press release, but in fact, based on what you said, they are really being very uptight about what...
They're only interested in their own freedom of speech. They're not interested in any freedom of speech that disagrees with what they've got to say. And that's the long and the short of it. And that's why a paper like that is important.
Of course, I agree. As I said, more merrier.
I think we should have more papers.
Yes,
like
we
this.
have to have in every ward we should have, not only in Ontario, in everywhere nationwide. So people should, because I think paper like that could help a electorate to understand who they are voting for. Right now, they are just voting for the party, provincially or federally.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's also the lie that goes around at election time that if you support an independent candidate or a fringe party, you're wasting your vote. Well, you know, if you look at the turnout, the last federal by-election I worked on, I think you ran in that one.
Which one, Toronto Centre?
The Toronto Centre.
Yes,
for Jack,
I was.
For Jack Layton's old seat. At the time,
Oh no, it was 2012. It was Toronto Danforth.
Toronto Danforth.
Yeah.
For Jack Layton's
Yes,
old seat.
yeah.
At the time, I was a member of the Canadian Action Party, small fringe party. Their main thrust was the Bank of Canada issue. I forgot where I was going with this.
About the fringe party.
About the fringe
independent
parties.
candidates.
Exactly. The only people that got any kind of media out of it were the mainstream parties, the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the NDP.
I have a memory from that particular by-election. Toronto Danforth. There were 3 debates at that time, 2012, and fortunately, it was the only one I can say for sure around in whole Canada that all 3 we managed to get all candidates invited to that debate.
Yeah, but what about the television debate?
No, I'm just.
What about the Rogers
no,
debate?
I am
just,
I am just interestingly enough. I am coming to that point. The very last one, I remember Justin Trudeau and a couple of the other prominent members of Liberal Party attended to that church on the corner of the O'Connor and Pape. And there were 2 major TV stations, I believe it was CBC and CTV, if I'm not mistaken. And they were there for 2 hours. They recorded every single minute of that debate. But when I went home and I look at the footage, they just showed 30 seconds that they were talking to Justin Trudeau.
Well, you know what I remember about that debate, Bauman? I'll tell you what I remember about that debate. What I remember about that debate was there was a statement that was drafted by the Action Party that was signed off by all of the independent and fringe party candidates. In other words, everybody in that election, with the exception of the Liberals, the NDP, and the Conservatives,
which didn't show up,
signed that statement. And when the moderator read that statement, the news media came over and picked up their microphones off the table and walked away. That's what I remember. So, you know, even though they were there and they were filming it, when all of the fringe parties and all of the independent candidates were making a joint statement about democracy in this country, as soon as the moderators started reading that statement, the news media picked up their mics and walked away. That's what I remember about that.
Which brings me
now let's before we move on to another subject, let's talk about the television debates in that by-election. Okay, the only television debates in that by-election were the Rogers debate, which they put out on community cable television.
They didn't.
Now, how do they operate that debate? And they do it the same every time, whether it's a major election or a by-election. They have the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the NDP,
and maybe
the Greens that sit there and have their debate that they advertise heavily and everybody watches. And then they bring in afterwards, when these guys get up and walk away, then they bring in the fringe parties and the independent candidates for a 1.5 minute statement.
Yes.
You know, so the fringe parties, by Rogers Cable, John Tory's outfit, the fringe parties and the independent candidates are treated like the red-hatted stepchild, while the major parties get a full 1 hour debate The fringe parties and the independent candidates get a minute and a half. Now, is that democracy?
No, of
it's
course not. Of course.
Is it freedom of speech? No, it's not.
Because we don't have enough equal time.
You're not getting equal time.
And the funny thing is, based on the rules of the Elections Canada, if there is a value attached to that airtime, they should report, but they...
Well, that's why they do it.
They don't do it. They don't even do that.
That's why they do it through Rogers Community Television, so they could say there's no value attached to it.
It is. That brings me to another. Having said all of that, with all of this tight control over the mainstream media, via mainstream political parties and our elected individuals, what was the point of federally bringing another tighter issue like Bill C-51 then?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I mean, if you have all of the control, if you have everybody on the leash, what is the point of another?
Okay, let me address C-51. C-51 is a dangerous piece of legislation. Now, you know, the left will always say, "Oh, you're a right-wing conservative unless you're coming out on the same side that they are." Okay, so Stephen Harper brings in this Bill C-51, telling everybody, "Oh, so this is so you know our police agencies can get a better control over Middle East terrorists." Bill C-51 is not meant to go after Middle East terror. Do you know who he's concerned about? He's concerned about these left-wing people that are protesting oil pipelines.
Oh, okay? In BC.
You've got domestic terrorists in Canada that are threatening to blow up dams and oil pipelines and all this sort of stuff, right? That's who Bill and that's why the left is so vocal about C-51. If it wasn't aimed directly at them, I don't think they'd be that upset about it.
So it is specifically because I remember a few years back, because of that passage of the oil through the BC, and then they passed another law. They have only 2 years for the environmental study. So apparently they couldn't succeed that, so they passed this bill to get over that. Then.
Well, I think what you've got is you've got a lot of dangerous environmentalists. Let me correct that. A lot of dangerous left-wing environmentalists that would like nothing better than to get into a shooting match with the oil company employees and the police. You've got a bunch of people out in British Columbia right now that have built a camp out there that's financed again by these left-wing organizations, these anarchists.
From where? From south of the border or from Canada?
Well, the money is coming. See, that's the point, right? These anti-oil pipeline groups, these left anti-oil pipeline groups, are being funded by foreign oil companies. They're being funded through non-governmental organizations like the Tides Foundation, the George Soros, you know, roots money through Canadian NGOs. Like the Suzuki Foundation, and that's how these extremists are financed. They're financed through foreign oil money coming through non-governmental organizations like Tides.
So because of the few NGOs are around, they're making some sort of the barricade against of the policies of our government, the rest of the population has to suffer because of the bills like C-51.
C-51 is a dangerous piece of legislation. You know, I'm not. I don't support these left-wing environmentalists, and even I say that C-51 is a dangerous piece of legislation. It's like hitting a fly with a hammer.
Now, because we have only a few minutes left, time flies, man. Can I ask you something? Having said all of this, what do you think is the solution for the public to get informed, or how we can help to encourage them to get their news from alternative media?
Well, I think if the public really wants to support freedom of speech, they need to support alternative media. They need to support alternative media with their dollars. They need to support local newspapers. They need to write articles and put them out on the internet. They need to get their video cameras out and shoot their own stories, because we can't rely on the controlled corporate media to tell us the truth anymore. If we're going to have real freedom of speech in this country, then people have got to take that power onto themselves. We've still got a free internet for the most part.
As we speak.
Yeah. Well, you know, they're clamping down on it.
Yeah.
You know, you've got YouTube will make sure that certain films go down the memory hole. You know, Google will lose stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Or even Facebook.
Facebook's a fine example.
Yes.
You know, but people need to be aware that the corporate media is telling them lies, and it's like I said, they're not big whopper lies. They're lies of omission. They're lies of spin. You know, they're
well,
lies.
do you think is there any way or any method that these small guys can get more audience to convey this message to the public?
I think good reporting will always get spread. It's like that film I did with Rocco in the courthouse.
The quality and the accuracy and the transparency.
Exactly. It was a message that needed to be heard. You put it out on YouTube, people see that, they spread it around. You know, wow. I think people need to talk to their neighbors about it. You know, when a paper like you know, Leroy's little Your Ward News comes in the mail, you know, if you've read it and there's something in there you like, point it out to your neighbors.
Sharing.
Yeah. You need to nurture independent media. I'd like to see more little neighborhood newspapers.
With that word, we are getting to the...
I'd like to see more shows like yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being
thank you
and
for
accepting my invitation. That was our show for today, 23rd of June 2015, and thank you for your time. This show will be available on YouTube within a few days, and within 1 week will be published on my website, which is votersecho.com. Please remember, take part in your democratic process, whatever left of it. Vote, be volunteer, help a candidate, and even become a candidate.
Join a political party.
Join a political party. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good night.